everyone. Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. Today, I have my buddy Michael Autore. He is the director of coaching of Motive NY, a club that specializes in physical therapy, personal training, and does feature some classes. He is a kettlebell expert, as you might be able to see on his Instagram. Michael is also the founder of Slim Thick, a brand designed to help people feel comfortable with their bodies. I've heard him speak about it so many times, and the messaging behind it that he portrays is just so inspiring. So, Michael, pleasure to have you. Obviously, I got to
Thanks
see you
for
a
having
couple
me,
weekends
man.
ago. Absolutely,
Yeah,
man.
we had a few weekends in a row. It's been good.
It's been wonderful. I had to ask you to come on because, you've just the way that I see you carry yourself and the energy that you convey is super uplifting. And that's really a big reason why I started this podcast, to give folks like you a platform to help inspire others who may not be surrounded with that positive energy that we try to emulate. So, I just kind of wanted to start off, I know a little bit about, your early years where you are originally from Pittsburgh based on how much you love your Steelers.
Yeah.
And, I just want to talk a little bit about like your early years and transitioning to Connecticut. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I don't actually have like the full sequence of events of like what inspired that entire move.
So everyone thinks I'm from Pittsburgh. My parents are from Pittsburgh. I'm not actually from Pittsburgh. Never lived there.
There you go. I was confused.
Yeah. So I've spent plenty of nights there over the years visiting family and going to Steelers games, but I'm not actually from Pittsburgh. My parents were born and raised there. That's where they met. They went to Duquesne University. They bounced around a few different states. I was born in Florida, and then they moved to Norwalk on the day of my first birthday. So Connecticut has been home to me, but Pittsburgh has always felt like a second home. And, I love the Steelers, so I'm always out there a good bit. Then, I grew up in Norwalk. My parents are still in the same house. I go back a good bit and went to All Saints Catholic School. Shout out to any classmates that I went to All Saints with. Went on to Fairfield Prep. That's in Norwalk. Okay. Honestly, I don't even know if it's the same school anymore. It should be, but that was preschool through 8th grade. So, the same 90 kids for however many, grades of school there. And then I went to Fairfield Prep for high school. I went there because my next door neighbor, who was like a big brother to me, was 1 year ahead. I shadowed him at prep, loved the experience, went there, played football. And then I went to Stonehill College, just south of Boston. Played football for a little bit, quit at the beginning of my junior year. And that's when I really jumped into the strength and conditioning, personal training world. And I started to intern as a coach for a year and a half. And then after graduating college, I've been personal training since 2012. And then obviously moved to New York City 6 years ago now.
Nice, man. I mean, I'm familiar with, I went to a private day school growing up from K through 5 and then transitioned into public schools. So you went to the prep. I'm familiar with Fairfield Prep because I live right around the corner from it. How do you think the private school early foundation affected you moving forward?
I will say, growing up, having gone to All Saints, I can't speak to how important my experience was there. I had a good childhood, no doubt, but a lot of my friendships were outside of All Saints, and that was through the Norwalk Pop Warner program. So those are some of my closest friends were through the Pop Warner program, and played football from, I think I was 8 through 12 years old. So that was, up and through middle school. And those are my closest friends. And actually you saw at the Slim Thick party last year, one of my teammates from when I was a little kid was the guest speaker at the Slim Thick event, Kevin Pierre-Louis, who's from Norwalk as well. But, again, I can't speak from a childhood standpoint, but I had an amazing experience at Fairfield Prep. And looking back, compared to anyone else who just went to a local high school, there's a huge difference right off the bat by taking the train to school every day. And that was a whole new world to me, is now interacting with adults and people commuting to their everyday jobs. And here we are just going to high school. And there was just a lot of programs through prep, as well as my experience on the football team, that really shaped who I am today, and a lot of mentors that I've met through there. But to this day, my closest friends are like my 3 or 4 close friends from prep. So it's really influenced my experience growing up.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, taking the train to school, like that kind of reminds me of like when I'm in the city and I see school children getting on the subway. And I'm like, all right, like that's so far into the way that I went to school where, like I woke up, my mom or dad drove me to school or I took the bus, and I saw the same people every single day. So it was very routine as opposed to like you got to get on the train and you saw different people all the time and just having that early interaction. Then you jumped into a private school, a Jesuit school as well. Was faith a huge part of your upbringing?
Not really. It was. We used to go to church when I was a little kid. We go to mass on Saturdays, and then the older I got, the less it happened. It kind of fizzled out. At prep, it was less of it being forced on you, but more getting you to think about theology or in other religions, and putting yourself in other people's shoes and being able to be empathetic. I think that was the cool side of the theology, or the faith side of going to prep. Is it wasn't you have to be practicing. It was really more of how you interact with people on a daily basis.
Awesome. Yeah, man. I mean, obviously the empathy, I think is something that makes you super relatable, where you have that part of you where like you're very easy to just like approach. That's something, I think that's why we connected, honestly, like right off the jump. I remember when we were in Stanford and I was talking to you about my job and how I wanted to leave and I wanted to like make this leap. Like, a lot of that conversation factored into me eventually doing that. One thing that like I think that you emulate really well is just like being relatable. How does like I don't think that's a natural thing, like being relatable and being approachable. Why is it important for you to like be that way?
I think if you start from the beginning, having older siblings was part of that. I felt like I was so quiet and I was just a sponge and I kind of listened to everyone. And if my sister had friends over, I wanted to just be in the room and listen. And that was most of my childhood. So I was always very quiet. And when it came to sports, I was quiet. Maybe I was leading at times, but I didn't feel like a leader because I was so shy. And I think years of being the shy kid. Yeah, man, I was very shy. And so years of being shy and kind of growing into your skin, and eventually, honestly, through the weight room and strength training and some like tough, gritty shit is what made me more vocal. But as I've gotten older, I went into the fitness industry thinking you're going to be this bodybuilder. You're going to be on the front cover of Men's Health magazines. And I had a very specific look that I was going for. Things changed. I lost my hair. I'm also not that muscular or that tan. I'm a little hairy too, if you go there, but it's not, it got to me. It's not relatable. You see massive bodybuilders and you look at them like they're a circus act. And obviously there's a threshold that people cross where it's a little bit of body dysmorphia, and it's like any extreme, right? And I think seeing that extreme, competing in a bodybuilding show, and then stepping back and going to a YMCA in Darien, I'm like, no one else looks like me. Like, I'm the only one posing with my shirt off in the bathroom, right? So that's when I first started seeing that I didn't think it was as relatable. And then as I've worked for years and done thousands of sessions and had other experiences and other people influence me, that's why I kind of shape fitness to be more digestible. And I want anyone who's in front of me, I want them to have a good experience with me or be able to relate to them, have some type of common ground, even if it's just talking football or whatever it is. And that's kind of where I'm at. I definitely also just have a lot of patience. I think I was gifted with a lot of patience, so I can be a good listener as well.
Yeah, man. I mean, like that moment when you like looked at these images and you're like, hey, like this is what I want to be. And you came to the conclusion that, hey, like, was it this isn't realistic or that's not me?
It was more that's not me. That's just not where I was headed. I didn't think it was right anymore.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
I
like
mean,
that's
my training career has shifted that way too. That's why I've gone through the mobility world and I work for physical therapists now. That's why I do things like the kettlebell and the Bulgarian bag. I don't want to be too fixed.
yeah. I mean, I think it's really great, like your presence on social and your approach to fitness, where you are working on mobility and you do work on not only just looking good but feeling good. And I think that's like super important because more often than not, like you know, we look on social media and we see these dudes ripped with their veins coming out and they might look good, but a lot of them don't feel good. And I know that just from working in that space as well, where it's like I've had trainers walk up to me and be like, listen, man, I will get you looking as good as you want, but you may not feel good tomorrow. And I'm
Hmm.
like hard stop. Like that's not really what I want. Like where, um, I'm not at that age where it's like, all right, like being a fitness model is realistic to just like how I want to live my life, frankly. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Well,
like,
another side of that. Sorry, I was going to say
go ahead.
the another thing with that is when this is not to label everyone, but when I see someone who's in really good shape, especially if they're young, my first thought immediately is, "Wow, you don't have a lot of responsibilities, do you?" And that's not to knock on anyone who is very disciplined or maybe a competitive athlete, but I was in the best shape of my life right out of college when I didn't have a job, right? And I
Yeah.
wasn't paying rent, and my mom was helping me with meal prep. It is if someone is 50 years old in the middle of their career, a CEO, and they're jacked, I'm like, wow, okay, that is impressive. That's a different level of discipline, right? So that's the thing is I went from being a 22-year-old jack dude to my body changed a little bit. I started to age. I also had different interests, right? So I think that it was a natural progression.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And obviously, like, you mentioned discipline right there. And regardless of what your fitness goals or life goals are, like discipline plays a tremendous role. What do you do on a day to day to keep yourself in that disciplined mindset?
It's fun. I'm a big guy on do as I say, not as I do, because I feel like my processes or lack thereof at times is not what would work for most. But I mean, honestly, I'm at a point now where I've built up another responsibilities around me that I have no choice but to pick up and keep working with just other projects and a different having my own business and working for another company. So part of it is I've now built this system where I have to be productive. But as I've gotten older, I really used to work out because of how I wanted to look, and now I do it really with how it makes me feel, and more specifically, the better I operate, the better I can handle everything around me, and that's why you'll see me work out early in the morning. Sometimes that's the only time I have, and it just makes me a nicer person throughout the day. But having uh, that consistent wake up, hopefully around the same time every day, maybe work out 3 or 4 times a week, that's what kind of keeps me going, and that's the structure that I still integrate into my lifestyle because I have to practice what I preach. I'm telling other people to do it. I have to practice it a little bit better than the ones learning from me, but I would say that's what I do on a regular basis, maybe not daily, but I'm trying to get movement in pretty regularly, and if my back is stiff, I have all the tools to address that. And that's the way I look at it is if my discipline comes down to how my body feels and moves and operates, and everything kind of falls into place if I'm putting myself first.
Nice, man. Obviously, you've this part of this stage of your career was after a major transition from moving from Norwalk into New York City. Um, Tell me a little bit more about that process because that's a huge life transition.
Yeah, of course. So I went. we'll start a little bit earlier. You go from my bodybuilding days where I was still living at home. I got my first apartment in Stanford off of Southfield Avenue, and I was working at the Darien YMCA, did that for a couple years. And then I took a sales job. At one point, I was selling raw materials to manufacturing plants, and I was never really proud of being a personal trainer earlier on. So at that point,
Why not?
I was working. I think it was, looking back, it was probably more self-imposed, but going to a private education high school, private education college, personal training was just kind of frowned upon. And I would pick up on certain remarks, or people would say, when are you going to get a real job? I remember, I had finally processed it, and I'd gone through different jobs, and I knew I was going to be a trainer. And I met someone out on Block Island at a bar, and I was talking to this girl at the bar, and she's like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a personal trainer. And she goes, oh, honey, you're capable of so much more than that. And I was now at a point where I'm proud of what I do. So I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Let me tell you a little bit about myself, right? But so I, for 6 or 7 years, bounced around between Norwalk, Stanford, Greenwich. And I had done well for myself financially at the time as a 25, 26-year-old. And I had seen other trainers 10 to 15 years older than me that were just doing the same thing that I had been doing. And I told myself I couldn't be there at their age. And it just felt like I was just in this hamster wheel. And it was fun. It was a good time, but I needed a little bit more. And around that same time, I went through a breakup, and I was just ready for a change. So I decided to rip it off like a Band-Aid and quit my job and broke my lease and moved to New York. I lived with my brother for a year. It's, again, not how you draw it up, but I did three big things at once, and lived on my brother's love seat for a year in Astoria. Thanks to him, he didn't charge rent once. I paid for some dinners, but he kind of let me get up on my feet, and that was a big year of growth for me, man. I went from having a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, washer and dryer, dishwasher in Stanford, to now I'm carrying my laundry over my shoulder down the street. Now there's no elevator. Now, there's a lot of things hit you with some perspective real quick. And now I have to start a new job and start over. Right. So there was, I don't want to discount how tough and challenging it was, but there was a lot of growth in that year for me. And I'm very thankful for making that jump to New York.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, just like making a huge shift like that. But I want to go back to what you said, like when that girl said that to you at the bar, and it's almost like I can relate to that, where you fall victim to stigmas where this is where I should be, or oh, like I came from here, I shouldn't be here, and like the societal just like pressure. And it's like, how did that, like, I mean, that obviously played a major role. But had she not caught you at a moment when you felt good about what you were doing, it probably would have affected you differently. And I think that's like so important, and having that support system with your brother to facilitate that transition was tremendous as well. So how long did it take for you to fall in love with the city?
You know what? Let me tell you from the start, I always hated New York City. I never saw myself living here. And my brother went to undergrad here and graduate school, and then he lived here for 20-ish years. And I always hated visiting him. I wanted to see him, but I hated New York. And it really stems back to, I mean, we went to Broadway shows a couple times and maybe visit some people for dinner early on. But I remember his college tour visit through Parsons. It was in the middle of the summer. It's just hell on earth. There's no wind. It smells like hot piss everywhere. And I was miserable. But years later, I'm now in a position where I felt like New York was the right jump for my career. And with the headspace I was in at the time, the shock of New York is kind of what I needed. What I didn't necessarily care for was figuring out the subway systems. And now I'm commuting a little bit further, and everything costs money. Even breathing here is pretty much expensive, right? So there was definitely a big adjustment, but I needed something so drastically different than the environment I was in that it it allowed me to enjoy the city a little bit. So also not paying rent helps, right? I was treating myself to some nice dinners with some dates with myself, but it wasn't really until after living with my brother for a year, I moved into Manhattan and I was close to Central Park and I just started seeing the city differently. And what really changed it was going through COVID and staying in the city and biking around Manhattan when no one was on the streets. That's honestly when I really fell in love with it. So it
Yeah,
took
I mean,
three-ish
that's a
three-ish years.
totally different perspective of the city.
Yeah, I remember one time after living here for a little bit, I went back to my parents' house for a long weekend, and they probably thought I was going a little bit nuts. I'm like working out outside. I'm walking everywhere. I just felt like I don't move as much when I'm home. And then I got back to the city and I'm going down this escalator and this homeless man was barking at me. And then I'm waiting for the subway and I was like, I'm home. I'm home. For
That's
some reason,
awesome.
this is home now.
That's awesome. So you consider yourself a New Yorker now?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I feel like I know enough about it, right? And I've been here enough
Yeah.
time. I've been here for 6 years. I've paid New York City taxes. I think that counts. That's a big part of it, right? But
Yeah.
there's definitely a part of now being here for 6 years. You miss having a little bit more space and maybe a little bit more flexibility at times. So maybe in a few years, I'll be able to kind of go back and forth, maybe between a condo or some small home. But it's I'm a New Yorker, man, and I expect to be here for a while because it's been good for my business and my personal life, and I don't see that changing.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you shared a little bit about what you were going through personally with a friend of yours during that transition and over the weekend. Um, that I feel like did play like a big role underlying. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had been in the city for less than 2 years when COVID hit, but around that time, a lot of my friendships were evolving. I turned 30 in 2020, and a lot of my friends were either buying houses or getting married or starting families. And I had one friend that was my best friend, would come visit me a good bit. COVID hits. I stay downtown and I'm working and teaching classes on Instagram Live and all that, which we can touch on maybe a little later. But yeah, lost my best friend a few weeks into COVID from a bad night with drugs, and I mean that's completely transformed my life. I look at my life before he passed and after he passed, and that's I referenced it before that I now have so much responsibility around me that I've built up that I have no choice but to keep going. And I mean, my friend is really my driving force behind all of that and why I keep doing what I do.
Yeah, no, I mean that's awesome. Obviously, it's awesome that you have like an angel like that to kind of push you because, um, especially during in a new city. I mean, it was after you had moved to the city.
I've been there for a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think that a lot of what you do that you talked about looking good and feeling good has a mental health component to it that I kind of wanted to touch upon because a lot of the content that you post and you talk about is very much how to not only improve your body but improve your mind. Um, what are like the most important pillars for you when it comes to your mental health?
First thing is strength training by far. And it's not to like force strength training down people's throats, but your body responds to a stimulus. And usually that's an external stimulus like added weight or a kettlebell or a dumbbell. So strength training is number one, or whatever you want to call it, movement. Number two is really my relationships, my inner circle, my friends, holding each other accountable is a big part of that. Daily touch points, whether it's through social media or text messages or quick phone calls. that's a big part of it. Obviously, my relationships with my family is a huge part of it as well. But this is my speech a couple weeks ago was really about perspective, and I think
Yeah.
that's what keeps me that's what keeps me content with where I'm at, or not comparing myself to other people. It's just like there's some people dealing with some shit, and some people don't even have healthy bodies to get around, or people are paralyzed, and I think because of the experiences I've gone through myself, the people I've interacted with, the conversations I've had, that all ties into my mental health as well. Is being able to put myself in other people's shoes, or have some perspective or some wisdom. So it's really movement, strength training, relationships, and then experiences and
Yeah, no,
perspective.
absolutely. I mean, relationships obviously are super important, and I think nurturing relationships that are mutually beneficial, and I'm not talking about financially, but it's like, hey, like you're adding value to my life. And the flip side of relationships is also knowing which relationships aren't good, regardless of how much you might care about someone. um Tell me maybe like a journey about a relationship where you kind of knew that, like, hey, this might not be the best thing regardless of how much I care about you.
Well, I'll tell you, when my friend passed, my mom had shared a resource with me about emotion chips. And the idea with emotion chips is that when you look at all of your friendships, it's who do you go to when you're feeling some type of way or you're experiencing something. So let's say you're going through a breakup. You maybe have one friend that you feel comfortable enough to break down in front of. You have another friend who's going to keep it surface level and says, let's go out to the bars and like go talk and meet other women. And you have another friend that is let's just go work out. I'm not even going to ask you about what happened. All right. And it's not saying one's better than the other, but knowing who you need to go to for certain things. And when I navigated through my friend's loss, that's when some of those emotion ships were really highlighted as to who steps up, who doesn't. And the reality is you're the main person you have to show up for is yourself, and it starts with that. But yeah, there's to tie into what like Brandon had talked about, givers versus takers. You realize that some people are really in it just to see what can you do for me, and on the other
Hmm.
hand, you have people who you either post about a product you're selling or an event, and they buy it right away just because they love you and want to support you. And not that it needs to be on a financial level, but that's just an example. It's you see the givers versus the takers, and I had a friend before I moved to New York City, and really when I first moved here, he kind of guided me because he's like a big brother that had lived in the city for years and was now no longer living here, but I was moving in, and he told me that people feed off your energy, and you're going to have to learn how to protect that. And when you moved into Manhattan, there's pizza on every corner. There's a bar on every corner. There's access to drugs everywhere. There's dating apps. You can have food delivered to your front door, right? There's also you hit it off with someone and they're like, hey, come out with us. And now you're out until 2 a.m. and you don't know where it can happen so quickly. So that's when my friend, who's like my Buddha, uh, uh, had just pulled me aside and said, yo, man, you got to start protecting your energy. And I think that kind of ties into sometimes you realize I have to cut this relationship off, or I'm just going to take this relationship and just put it in this box over here. And I know if shit hits the fan, that's not the person to go to, and that's okay.
Hmm. I mean, what triggered him telling you that?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure. It's I think it was just maybe at a point in my life where I was kind of naive and giving everyone a chance. And hey, I'm
Mm.
moving to New York, all excited, and he's just being devil's advocate, like, sit down, brother.
Yeah, like, yeah, be careful with who you like. Don't associate yourself with everyone, kind of
Yeah.
mentality. Which I guess that's like the flip side, where it's also like super important to set boundaries. But I do love what you said about emotion ships and um, the different categories that you laid out. And it's funny because just a quick story. Like I remember when my mom passed away, and it also is somewhat of a filter, where when something traumatic happens in your life and you see who's still standing and you see who's like, hey, like I'll try to make it, or you don't get a call, you don't get a text. And it's funny because it's a rude awakening to a certain perspective where you're like, I probably would have been there for them, and why aren't they there for me? And I remember in those moments, I started to harbor harbor resentments towards people, because I was like, why aren't you reaching out? I thought you cared. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I was just thinking about how you just laid that out, where it's like you have those three friends where they know their roles and it's natural, and just their presence is comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you covered like a lot there, and um, I think that's kind of a good segue into Slim Thick, because tell me, like, the early imagining of Slim Thick, what you
Mm-hmm.
set out to do, what inspired it, and we can start there.
Well, start with that. I've always been heavily influenced by hip hop culture, R&B, and that's where I first heard of the term was in a hip hop song. Uh, Way back, you can go to one of the Rough Riders albums. They listed on one of their songs, but it was really around, I think it was like 2015. Is Fetty Wap had it in one of his songs, and I always joked that I was Slim Thick. And here I am. I'm a trainer all day, but then I go out with my friends at Stanford at night and I eat poutine, at 2 a.m. And then I wake up and I train people again. I realized that wasn't realistic, but I did see a lot of people around me within the fitness industry over the years coming in with all their meals weighed out, and I have to go to sleep by this time and I got to do this, and just stressing about the wrong shit at times. And I just felt like with getting to a point where I was more confident in my skin and I definitely felt more relatable to whoever was sitting across from me, that's when I was like, you know what, maybe I could build an idea around Slim Thick. And when I moved to the city, I was just making money on the side through, whether it was through cash or through Venmo, and I needed to actually monetize this and report it, because I was paying my rent for it at that point. And that's when I decided, am I actually gonna do this, or are you just gonna be like Michael Autore Fitness, or are you just gonna be Intensity Fitness or Evolution? And I'm like, no, I want to do something much bigger than personal training. I've been at the time when I started, I've been training for almost 10 years at that point. So I had an idea that I wanted to chase after, and I felt like it would also be a creative outlet for me. And that's how it all started coming together. It was also ultimately sparked after my friend had passed away. It was like, well, what do I have to lose now? So I was definitely nervous, but I talked to one of my clients about it, and fortunately he set me up with a lawyer who comped his time. And I felt so dumb on that phone call. There was three lawyers and I had to describe what I was trying to build, and I had no idea what I was building. And one guy was like, yeah, I get it, man. I get it. Slim Thick. Yeah. And I remember them saying to me, I got to tell you the story, because this is one of the dumbest I felt on this phone call. I couldn't understand what they were asking me. Right. And they said, okay, if you see a Metallica t-shirt, do you think Metallica made that, or you think someone else did? I was like, probably someone else. I doubt Metallica made that one. They're like, all right, Nike. You see a Nike shirt. Do you think Nike made that? And I'm like, yeah. So which one's Slim Thick? I was like, oh, definitely Metallica. I'm the Metallica guy. So, I'm not making clothing from scratch. I need to go buy it and print on it. So it's been an evolution, but again, it was all around
This is a
the
lawyer
time with my
asking you this
friend.
question?
Yeah, three lawyers on the same call.
That's great.
And mind you, it was all comped. I'm really appreciative of a client who comped it for me, but they probably talk to my client and be like, man, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. But they started the LLC for me, and I remember I got all the paperwork here, and I was like, oh shit, now I have a business.
Nice. So, when I hear you share about Slim Thick, it's not only about feeling comfortable in your body, but the mentality that pairs with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's basically everything that we've kind of covered right now, like just your approach. Um, what are your plans for Slim Thick?
So I've originally started with just any of the side training is what operates Slim Thick, but to take a step further, all the money that I'll generate from private training sessions or remote coaching, I use to uh, fund some of the marketing, reaching out to other strategists, paying for some of my personal development. Honestly, as well, has been a huge part of that. So for the last 2-3 years, it was really kind of figuring how do I grow this year over year, also with the respect of having a full time employer outside of this. And I got dipped my toes into merchandise a little bit, and that's a whole learning experience too, because I have boxes of merch in my New York City apartment, and if you want to scale business, that's not the way to do it. But I needed to go through these practice reps of selling a product online, packaging it, bringing it to UPS and shipping it, and going through all those repetitions. And I think long term there will be a lot more merchandise and things under Slim Thick. But where I really want to go with is I want to I want to build an army of people that move and think differently and empower people to check in on their friends. And again, I made it clear in the speech that I gave that I'm not a counselor and I'm not a therapist, but we can raise the bar for how people talk about mental health. And so with strength training, I want to use the narrative with Slim Thick, I want to use the narrative of strength training and mental health and body positivity. And some of that will tie into some events. I mean, you were part of the Slim Thick party I had last year. Again, something I had no
That was
idea what I was
awesome.
doing, but that was the first one. Yeah, it was a really fun night, and I've had some inspiration from that night. I've got to plan on doing that once a year now, and I'll also be doing a wellness retreat later this year, and that will all fall under Slim Thick. And I have plans on trying to expand that as well. But I'll be honest with you, there's times where close friends of mine are like, "Yo, why aren't you doing this and that and this?" And I'm like, I move at my speed. I have a full time job. I have a fiance. I got a dog. Like I'm happy. I'm okay. And I understand that there's a process to building this vision, and I'm not going to sell myself to the devil, to get there quicker. Right. So it's all a natural progression, and I couldn't imagine where I am if back in 2021 when I actually formed an LLC, and it's been really fun, man. And again, it really feels as just a way to express myself, and I'm just trying to teach people how to live happier and healthier lives.
Dude, that was like one of the most relatable answers I've ever asked a new entrepreneur. No, because it's funny, man, because like I started my own business, and you know what? Like when people ask me like what I want to do, it's like I know what I want to do. I want to help people and I want to influence the nonprofit space. But the thing that like most people, when you ask a lot of entrepreneurs what their plan is, they speak so confidently. And then when you're off camera or you're talking privately and you're like, okay, what do you like? What's your plan here? A lot of them don't know. And like that's the thing. It's like the part of the journey is like learning, and also like, hey, like I need a budget this time, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that like this isn't going to happen overnight. So like I just love that answer because it was just like, hey man, like I'm learning every day and I'm growing it at my pace, and I'm happy with where I am now. And I do have these big dreams, but I also understand they're not going to happen overnight. And
Mm-hmm.
like that's somewhere, I was just talking to a friend today about that, where it's like, I'm not blessed with your patience. I
Mm-hmm.
am a impatient motherfucker, bro. And sometimes I want results right away, and that has proven to be a fatal flaw of mine.
Mm-hmm.
um in the past, pre-recovery, it was definitely a fatal flaw of mine. And now it's like sometimes you just got to be like, listen, I'm right exactly where I am supposed to be. and
Mm-hmm.
I need to put in the work and put in the reps and budget my time accordingly. And I also need to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy life, and
Mm-hmm.
so I really love that answer. I also love that you shared about your different approach to mental health and how, like, Slim Thick provides a vessel for it to be more relatable, frankly, because I think there
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of shame that is attributed to people struggling with their mental health. And, like that's such an important thing to mental health. It shouldn't be shameful. It should be
Yeah.
something that it should be just like physical health. And I know, like, obviously the work with the Laura House was awesome that you do. Um, what has been like your biggest lesson when it comes to the mental health space? Was there a time when, like, I don't really know how to, like,
I got
I
it.
guess
So
tell it.
I
Yeah.
I have an idea. So my mom's been the president CEO for Laurel House for 16 or 17 years now. So she took that job when I started, maybe a little bit after high school or so. I can't remember. I can't do math right now. I think I was 16 or 17. And in college, I interned there for a summer. And, you're dealing with people who are very ill. And I wasn't really around that or exposed to it. When I thought of mental health, I thought of it as, oh, this person went through something traumatic and they're depressed, or they lost a job and they're depressed. So I saw it on the spectrum of, or the end of the continuum of where this person is clinically depressed or has been genetically predisposed and really needs help. And there's like social service, and then there's clinical service. And going through some things myself, being depressed at times, moving to New York City and navigating through that. Also having worked with my mom and having just the nature of our relationships and the conversations we have is it's a common thing we talk about. And it's just the nature of our relationship. And that's what's definitely shaped how I think about mental health, is because I also have the clinical support if I need to go back to it and talk about it. And I also know who I am and where I draw the line. It's like with personal training, I'm not a physical therapist, and a lot of people try to walk that line. And I know exactly when to identify an issue and say, this is out of my scope and I need you to go talk to one of our physical therapists. I also know when I can just proceed and it's a non-issue. And I feel like that happens with mental health. And that's where I want to be on the side where, how do we improve the social support side of it and just get people to be more comfortable talking about it. And I realized that the conversations that I have at home are not normal. So how do I share the resources that I've used in my life with other people? And the people that are less fortunate or don't have a household like I do, how can I share what has worked for me?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like, yeah, having mental health playing a huge role just in your household is such a gift to folks who don't necessarily have that, where mental health, isn't something that's really talked about. I had to discover mental health on my own because my parents are both my parents are both immigrants. They're old school, old country. My father isn't really even, he's at a place where he can accept that, hey, my son had a problem with alcohol, but he always looked at it as like a choice. Like, you had a choice. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
why you keep choosing, rather than understanding that, addiction and alcoholism and falls under the mental health umbrella. What would you say to someone when they look at mental disorders as a binary choice, as more opposed to as an illness?
Ooh, that's deep. I think I was going to go a different route. I thought you were going to ask a different question first, which I just kind of want to lead with because I think it'll go into. It's like, what do you
Okay.
do? what do I say to someone who didn't grow up in a household like mine?
Mm.
And my route with that is the importance of mentors and someone a little bit older than you that's gone through the same shit that you're going through or can help you navigate through something difficult. And I think that's the most important part. If I look at, especially when I was a little bit younger, the relationships I had, the people I look up to, the people who've helped me in business and in life, is it's really important to have a mentor and someone outside of your family that is looking out for you, and that's not something you can just go look for, but misery attracts misery, man. If you're going through some shit, you can find someone who went through that is on the other side of it. And I think that's where I was going to go with it. The other side is not everyone's so open to mental health. And I would love to have discussions with those people face to face. I don't think social media will do it, but that's where you need to share a little bit of perspective with someone and let them know, like, yo, I've seen the people who are actually ill, and I've seen people who are just going through some shit right now. And everyone responds to therapy different or needs something to help navigate through that grief or that depression. But yeah, some people, if people aren't open to it or just hard nosed, one, we can't control that. But two, I would love to share perspective with those people on things that I've gone through or things I've experienced to, try to convince them otherwise.
Awesome, man. I mean, obviously, like with your mother is like a role model to me. Just meeting her, seeing the way she carries herself, but just seeing the way she genuinely cares is just like, it's just so beautiful. What are other mentors that you've had in your life?
My first football coach, Greg Smith, still friends with him on Facebook, see his workout videos and everything. He was my Pop Warner coach for all 5 years. And just to paint a picture, he looks like DMX, sounds like DMX. And he was just a hard-nosed dude to have as your football coach as an 8-year-old. And I remember I was so small at the time that I was what they consider an older lighter. So I was older than everyone, but I was so small that I could play with people that were younger than me. And there was a time where I wanted to quit after my second or third year, and I was set on it. And I didn't. This is back in the day. There's no like social media or anything, right? So my coaches didn't find out until they receive a paper in their hand that I'm not on the roster anymore. And I remember my dad picking up the phone, and I was like, "Oh shit! I think he's talking to Coach Greg." And mind you, it's like one of those really long telephone cords that you could like walk across the house with and sit on the couch. And I remember him saying, "Hey, Mike, Coach Greg wants to talk to you." And he said some powerful shit on that phone call. I was a 6th or 7th grader, and he just said how important I was to the team. And it wasn't even about the performance side. It was more so like, you're kind of the glue where everyone gets along with you, and you're a focal point of this team. And that's who I would say is my first mentor. That's who I definitely looked up to outside of anyone in my family. And then when I was in high school at Fairfield Prep, there's a guy of the name Matt Ramos who, when I was a freshman, I would be in the gym every day working out or throwing the football with my friend. We'd be running routes, and he saw us every day hustling. He's like, "Yo, man, I can help you guys a little bit in the weight room." And he was a former graduate that just finished up college, was in between jobs. He was trying to play professional football. So he took a role at the high school, and before you know it, he became my strength coach. And very early on, he saw a lot more in myself than I did. And I remember we were doing some workout one day in the gymnasium, and I was struggling with this footwork drill. And I said, "I can't do it." And he pulled me aside, man, and I saw God in him. He was scaring me, and he just put his finger in my face and said, "I better never hear the words 'I can't' ever come out of your mouth." He said, "You don't realize, but everyone here looks up to you, and they follow your lead." And I was like, "Oh shit, okay, so I got to eliminate those words." And I then grew really close with him as I got older. He became like a big brother, and then he brought me out to clubs in New Haven when I was like 19, 20 years old, and would sneak me in or talk the bouncers into letting me in. And then he was a mentor in so many other ways. We'd walk in and he'd say, all right, I want you to go introduce yourself to the bartender. Tell her we're going to be here all night, but we'll take care of her. This girl over here is looking at you. Make sure you go say hello. Watch out for this guy. He looks like a little uneasy, right? And that's when I started to see things differently. And he just opened up my eyes to a lot of different things. And since then, after graduating, oh yeah. And then again, this is just another person who's 8-9 years older than me. And then once I got to the YMCA, there's a guy named Gene Denota who was my boss and a little bit older than me. And he was in the bodybuilding world. And here I am looking at an Italian guy that I relate with. And he was kind of like a father figure to me, and still think very fondly of him and the time we had together. And then when I moved to the city, I actually went and hired mentors or business mentors that I sought out. And two of those guys I still every now and then interact with via social media now. But yeah, I've done like year-long mentorship programs that were specific to business or for your own health, but I always flipped it and would get along with them and say like, hey, but can you gear the mentorship like around this stuff? Like I feel like I'm set in these ways. I love that you're a father figure and a good family man and a business owner like that. I want to hear about life. I care less about the sets and reps. I've done enough of that shit. That's not exciting to me. So those are that would be the timeline of mentors I've had.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's awesome. Like, it's funny because like having those mentors just feeds your emotional intelligence. I think like, obviously like having mental health in your home for a very long time and then surrounding yourself with mentors, which you just described, like it just builds on your emotional intelligence. I mean, it's funny because I don't think I've realized how big emotional intelligence plays in my life until I was surrounded by people with high emotional intelligence and saw that the way that they approach just everything, like not only the relationships, but just how it translates into all facets of their life. And, that's something that I work on every day, where it's like not to act impulsively, because when I act on emotion and whatnot, it doesn't really like resonate with. I won't get the results that I'm looking for. Honestly, I'm not really exactly sure where I'm going with this.
No, well,
kind of like
nothing really ever works out well if you react with emotion, unless it's your favorite team just scored a winning touchdown, right? There's just it's how can you make decisions without emotion? And I remember, it kind of comes full circle as we're talking about it. Is I went through a period of time where I was ashamed to say that I was a personal trainer. And then there was a shift in my mind. And then I realized, wait, this is such a unique situation because here I am, especially when I was in Fairfield County, here I am training people middle-aged who have disposable income to work with me. And I get to ask them about what motivates them and what they work on and what industries they're in. So that's when I started to position myself almost like a point guard within my network, because I realized people were already coming to me about their health, about their stress, about money, about housing. I didn't have a background in any of that. So I would just be able to, start to put people together. And I just told this story the other day, but there was one Saturday morning I came in to coach, and I was with my client at the time, this guy Barry, and he said something about EQ, and I was like, "What's EQ?" And he's like, "You don't know what EQ is?" And he knew I was hooked. He was about to like tell me a good story, right? So he's like, "It's emotional intelligence." I'm like, "Okay, I've never really thought about that. What is it?" And he said, "All right, you have a really high stress job, and you have all these deliverables, and you're running behind, and you got a stack of papers on your desk, and your boss is down your neck every day, and you're working long days, and you get home, and now your wife's down your neck, and then your dog throws up, and your kid's running all over the house screaming, and you can't lose your mind. You have to hold it together." And he said, that's emotional intelligence, is how can, when there's chaos around you, how can you still be the same cool dude that you are and make the same sound decisions? And I think emotional intelligence, at least for me, looking back, is from some of the situations or positions I've put myself in at times, like going and doing stand-up comedy or going and doing public speaking, being around a room of people like yourself who, we all have a lot of courage to go up there and speak, especially early on into our public speaking careers. And throwing my own event like that put a lot of pressure on me and taught me a lot. And I feel like that's where a lot of my emotional intelligence comes back to, is previous experiences. Helps me navigate
Absolutely.
through.
And like putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and then getting through them. It's funny, bro, because like the first time I went to speaker school was a Chicago speaker school. And Rob Trax had told me about it. And I was like, I don't want to public speak. I didn't think there was any value in my story. And I carried a lot of shame with my story. And I remember going to Chicago and being like, I'll sit for the first day, but if I hate it, I'm exploring the city for the rest of the time. Like, at least I got a vacation out of it. Obviously, I didn't. I stayed there and I shared my 5-minute keynote, and I was nervous as all hell. And I shared this story about like, my adoption and my friend taking her own life and, all these other things. And it was crazy because at the end of it, everyone came up to me and was like, that was super powerful. Like, and it's funny because sometimes we don't even see the value in our own story until we actually, put it out there. But yeah, like I think that was like a big major turning point for me because, I wouldn't have envisioned being on that stage a couple weekends ago. And, it was like empowering, frankly. And I think that's really what feeds into going back to what you're saying, how it's like, yeah, like once you put yourself in these, you test yourself. And that's definitely a major component of being in that situation that your friend Barry described, where you're everything's happening around you and you're able to kind of sit there and be like, okay, I got this, and it comes down to like the confidence and also being able to voice when, hey, maybe I'm not feeling the most confident in myself right now. And seeking out the mentors to reinforce it. Hey, listen, like sometimes you do just need a cheerleader. Be like, dude, you got this, and that's the type of people I surround myself with now, where, also going back to what we discussed before when we were talking about takers and givers. Before, I used to surround myself with a lot of takers where I couldn't go to them and be like, hey, like I'm struggling with this, because they would talk me out of even trying. So, that kind of comes full circle where it's just like you highlighted the relationships and the fitness and just the mental health, like those three combined, when you're watering all three of them, like will yield results. So, I think that's beautiful.
You made me think about something else you were asked earlier on in the call about, what do I do on a daily basis to kind of keep me disciplined? And I forgot that I also schedule certain workouts or certain meetings, which kind of hold me accountable. And one of them is, we've both worked with Brandon, and having a soundboard like Brandon a half hour every week is a pillar of regularity for me and being able to talk through anything. But I'm also getting at is about 2 years ago, I picked up Muay Thai. I'm not going to claim I'm a good fighter or anything like that, but I train once a week with a coach, at least 3 or 4 times a month. And it doesn't matter what happened before I walked in or what happened that weekend. I have to show up Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and it's progressed. And sometimes he just beats my ass, and I know he can beat my ass, and he's just holding back. And then I'll make progress and clock him in. Like this past Tuesday, I finally clipped him on the chin a couple times, and I knew I was just going to get my ass beat. But the way I look at it is, if I can willingly create the hardest hour of my week, then I can get through anything I face from a work standpoint. And that's part of, that ties back to doing hard shit. There's times I don't want to go over to Brooklyn and train with my coach, but it's why people come travel all the way to train with me or to book calls with me and go through coaching. I need that myself too. So in line with the mentors, I also, work with other coaches, and that holds me accountable too.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know like one of my buddies, he every day he does an ice bath in the morning, and he's like, bro, I do the ice bath because I know this will be the worst part of my day, because he was like posting about it, and I'm like, dude, like, why do you enjoy that? And he was like, I don't. He was like, that's how I tell myself throughout the day when I'm being tested.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the hardest part of my day is behind me. So I don't do the ice bath. I do the cold shower after a workout. And that's kind of like my space where I'm like, all right, like I could get through this. And, nothing.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable. That's the daily discomfort that helps you navigate through a day.
Yeah, it's almost like the placebo effect, where it's like, like nothing phases me. And it's funny when like you're on this, path of personal development and personal growth, and people around you start to notice how you've changed. And, that's like one of the coolest things for me. But it's also like, hey, like I got to check myself, because like the way I've been able to grow is by kind of eliminating ego and not letting it be like, oh, like I'm so great now. But like, no, now that I have the tools, I can help others, which is a really big approach. One of the things that, like I feel like you are surrounded by like-minded folks. What do you do when someone close to you may not be on that same personal growth journey?
It's a great question, because I have a few friends my closest friends don't live in New York. I have a very big network, but like my high school friends don't live in New York. My college friends don't live in New York, and they've all gone through stages of life at different times compared to me, where again, people are buying houses earlier on or starting a family earlier than I did. And I had a lot of people over the years say like, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? When are you going to buy a house? I'm like, you don't realize that Slim Thick is my house. Like that's the same type of investment for me, right? That's what I put my work into. And with all the personal development stuff I've done and working with mentors and being around entrepreneurs and people who have startups, at times that's all you end up talking about, and you kind of carry yourself away with it. And I have one friend who I've always tried to help from a business standpoint or help get him jobs. And I would end up just getting a little frustrated. Like, how do you not see the world like I do? Right. And it comes back to what we said before, is there's a lot of people will always say, I'm going to write up a business plan and then I'll get started. I'm like, I didn't have a business plan. I'm sorry, but I didn't have a business plan. I was just like, I just can see what Slim Thick could be. And fortunately, if you can provide a service or sell a product, you can just start an LLC. There's a podcast I was listening to. It's the president of Shopify. He said you can, between whatever websites you want to go to, you can essentially start an LLC for the cost of a cup of coffee. I mean, it's pretty easy now to start your own business, but people will be like, I gotta build this business plan, or I gotta get all my ducks in a row. And that's kind of where I was with my friend on a thing. And I remember expressing it to another friend of mine, and he goes, yo, when are you going to stop being your boy's business coach? When are you just going to go back to being his boy? And I was like, oh, right. That's okay. No. I should just, I don't need to talk to him about business. Let's just go back to being his best friend. Right. And that kind of comes back to, there's certain things where I'm just going to put people in certain buckets for, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean he's not reliable or not one of my closest friends, but I don't need to talk to him about business. If he approaches me on it, and personal development, I'll be happy to help, but I can't force that down your throat.
Yeah, it's so true. Like people come to you advice, and then you'll give it to them. And I was talking to Kyriakos about this, and it's I don't know. You met Kyriakos? I think you did
Once,
in
yeah,
New York.
yep,
Yeah.
and yep.
And I was talking to him about like, hey, like I don't give people advice because I'll when I give people advice and they don't take it, I'll start to resent them, and it's kind of crazy when or I'll get frustrated with them like not doing it how I advise. But you're absolutely right. Like you'll know when people are ready, just like people, like I knew when I was ready. And I'm sure I frustrated a lot of people who are trying to like give me advice, good, coming from a good place. But yeah, like understanding that, hey, like let's just, let's not ruin the friendship that we have because you're not, being receptive, or maybe I'm not, like it's obviously miscommunication when it comes to like, this is not where I'm positioned to be in your life.
Yeah.
Which is like humbling sometimes when you're like, all right, like I can't serve him,
Yeah, it was kind of eye opening for me a couple years ago when I realized that, and this isn't a bad thing when I say it, but that some people are just content with where they're at and having a steady salary and living in the middle of wherever in their home. And a lot of people cannot imagine living in New York City, like all the things that I do. And how does he do all that? And it's, we all have gone through different experiences and different driving forces. And it's okay if you're cool with where you're at and you don't want to be doing public speaking. You're not trying to start your own business. That's okay.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that's going back to like, my father, like it's very much like where he's like, this is what I did to get to where I was. So, like he projects his blueprint onto mine and my sister's life, where it's like, hey, first of all, it's 2024. It's like not 1970 or 80. Times have changed a little bit. And I know it comes from a good place, but it's like, hey man, like when I took that leap, I knew he was a little uneasy about it at first, but I also knew that like he wasn't the best person to give me advice as to what I want to do, and one of the things about giving advice is also asking for advice. And one of the big things I did was I went to people who were doing things that I wanted to do and asked them for advice rather than asking every, Tom, Dick, and Harry, like, what should I do? Because then that just clogged up my decision-making process.
Yeah.
I
And they'd
went
be like,
to
oh, why,
someone.
why are you going to do that?
I was like, yeah, it's like you're not going to ask a mechanic, how to start a personal training business the same way, I'm not going to ask just like anybody, like, how do I tap into the philanthropy space to make a difference? So, I surround myself with other people in philanthropy. Obviously Brandon, played a big role in the just like, like the drill that he does with setting, your goals in a, 10, 5, and 3 years, that was tremendous for me because it really was, it made everything realistic, and it also did instill a little patience for me, which is, as I shared before, I struggled with, and still do. But yeah, man, I still do. But
I
I
feel
wanted
like
to
we gotta go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No.
I was gonna say, I feel like we got to give Brandon like an actual shout out. I know that you've had other people within his community on your podcast, but that going through A to B Con and obviously having watched his growth over the last few years, but seeing how many people turned out for him, and I'm so fortunate to have him in my life as a friend and as a mentor now and as a coach at times. And I just got to say, he knows this. I tell him all the time, but it's so cool that he was one of my first hires when I was 24 years old, and we've navigated through working with each other and now kind of working back with each other again. Right. So had to give him his flowers on this call.
Dude, absolutely. I mean, with Brandon, it's like, he genuinely wants to see other people grow in business, grow in their perspective, and grow in their ambition to help others. And it's super selfless. I mean, don't get me wrong, Brandon gets paid, but it's super selfless the way he will just, all right, Adam, like, like I could bounce anything off of him, and he shows up. That's the thing with Brandon, man. Like, he shows up, and like, I couldn't ask for anything more than that out of a friend. And the other thing is he shares his network, where it's like, hey, like, he's constantly introducing me to new people who will help me grow. And I think that is just something spectacular that he does. And obviously with the conference, bringing everybody together. Like, I tip my hat to Brandon, and I try not to gas him up too much.
You got to keep him in check.
Oh yeah, dude. Like, but not really though. He's a super humble dude.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to close with just like some rapid fire questions. They never are rapid fire, but we'll see. What are three pieces of advice you'd give to someone on a journey to find their purpose?
1, surround yourself with good people and probably find a mentor. 2, try a little bit of everything. Try challenging stuff. If it scares you, it's probably good for you, and to at least try it once. And number 3, I'd say you got to be patient. You got to be patient. Let's add a 4th in there. You also got to take care of your health. So make sure you put yourself first when it comes to maintaining your health and strength training. So I'll give you a 4th one with that.
Beautiful. How would you define purpose?
For me, purpose is I have driving forces behind what I do, but purpose is more of like where I'm headed. And not everyone else is going to understand that vision or have gone through the same experiences or have the same perspective as you. But that's what purpose is to me. It's more so like you have a clear vision of where you're headed, and that's where you're working towards.
Awesome. And let me see. I feel like those are the only 2 questions. I'm going to edit this out.
I thought you were gonna ask me with like favorite cereal or some shit.
What's your favorite cereal?
It's gonna go back to Cocoa Krispies. Love Cocoa Krispies.
Love that, Mike. All right, Mike. Why don't you tell the audience how to get in touch with you and what upcoming projects that you might have going on?
Yeah, so you can find my personal Instagram, michael.autore, Autore, and my SlimThick Instagram as well as SlimThick, SLIMTHICK.NYC. It's not 2 C's. I spell it with a CK like it's a word. And the biggest thing coming up is I have a couple smaller events at Motive, like a kettlebell workshop I'm teaching. I also have a hip hop step class I got coming from North Carolina, doing a pop-up class at Motive soon. And then I'm getting married after that. So that's my main focus, is getting through the summer and having a great wedding. And then we'll get back to work after the wedding.
All right, my man. Beautiful. I got to come down for one of those kettlebell classes.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Of course. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, man. We'll talk soon.